Hello and welcome back to another great session within ETL and ELT section. So in this session, we are going to discuss about what are the differences between ETL and ELT in details with certain parameters. All right, so let's move on. So let's go to the next slide. So I have put a differences between ETL and ELT with the parameters with respect to those parameters. Let's analyze what is ETL and what is ELT. So the first one is the process. In terms of process, what is ETL, and in terms of process, what is ELT? So the data is transformed at a staging server and then transferred. Data is transformed at the staging server and then transferred to the data warehouse database. But in the case of ELT, data remains in the database of the data warehouse. So in ETL, so this means the data is transformed at the staging server and then transferred to the data warehouse database, means the transformation rules are applied in the staging area itself. In the case of ELT, data remains in the database of the data warehouse. That means the transformation rules are applied in the target table itself. What is the next parameter? That is code usage. It is used for the computer or compute intensive transformations and the small amount of data, the code usage. But in the case of ELT, it is used for the high amounts of data. So how? So in ETL, the complex mathematical and the database aggregations are performed on this small amount of the data. But in the case of ELT, the complex and the mathematical and database aggregations are performed on the large amount of data, because like I mentioned earlier, right, so it is basically used for the NoSQL databases like Hadoop cluster, those kind of database where you have a lot of social media data. So on that data, so the ELT, the complex mathematical transactions are obtained on that. So that means the transformations are applied to the target database itself. The third parameter is transformation. Transformations are done in the ETL server or staging area, like I already mentioned, but transformations are performed in the target system. That means where the transaction is done in both the processes. The time and the load. So the data first loaded into the staging and later loaded into the target system. So it's a time intensive. Since this involves the middle layer, the time taken will be comparatively more. Since one of the layer in the data load is not there, time to load the target table is less. Time transformation. ETL process needs to wait for the transformation to complete. As the data size grows, the transformation time is also increases. So like we discussed, the data load on the target table has to wait until the transformation is complete in the staging area. As the data grows over a period of time, the time taken for the transformation also increases, which increases the time to load the target tables. So you have to take into consideration of this, whether it's a ETL or ETL. So in case of ELT, right, so the speed is never dependent on the size of the data. Since the target table loading is not dependent on the transformation in the staging area, size of the data does not matter and data is directly loaded into the target table. So the next is time maintenance. In case of ETL, it needs a high maintenance as you need to select the data to load and transform. Since the transformation is usually applied on the set of data among all other data available, developer has to make sure the proper jobs and the lookup has to be maintained in the process. In the case of ELT, the low maintenance as the data is always available. Since the data is available in the source all the time and directly loaded onto the target table and no staging area, because of all this, there is a less maintenance work. The next parameter is implementation complexity. At an early stage, easier to implement in case of ETL. Easy implementation as the process is broken into 3 different stages. But in ELT, to implement ELT process, organization should have deep knowledge of tools and the expert skills. How? Because since the target tables has to handle all the transformation, the programs and the coding has to be written in such a level that it wouldn't affect the performance of the reporting. So what are the next parameters? Support for the data warehouse. ETL model used for on-premises relational structured data. That means the data which resides in a relational data and on-premises. That means you're hosting the servers in your company. You're not depending on the cloud or anything. This is built on the defined structure as per the business need. What is then ELT? So it is used in the scalable cloud infrastructure which supports structured, unstructured data sources. This kind of data is stored on the cloud database, and data stored is usually unstructured data which is received from platforms like social media. All right, next parameter is data lake support. So for ETL, data lake does not support. ETL will not support the data lake activities because the data lake expects data warehouse to load their data directly into the database to apply the transformation which is required for the data lake users. What happens in ELT? So it allows the use of the data lake with the unstructured data. Since the ELT process supports direct load of the data into a target tables, the unstructured data received from the NoSQL databases can be directly loaded into the data lake tables as they are target tables for the data warehouse. What is the cost? How ETL and how ELT responds to the cost. So in ETL, high cost for the small and medium business. If you want to implement ETL for a small and the medium business, it's going to cost them huge. Since the infrastructure has to be on premises, initial investment cost will be high for small and medium businesses. But in the case of ELT, the low entry cost using online software as a service platforms. Since databases are hosted on the cloud platform, the maximum of the infrastructure and the operation cost is reduced. That way, the ETL process is cost effective. Cloud is basically a hosting platform where I don't have to have my infrastructure to save the data or store the data on my premises. So there are so many companies currently in the market which provide this cloud platform, and this is the big technological shift which is happening. People are going from on-premises to the cloud. Then what is the next parameter? Lookups. So in the ETL process, both facts and the dimensions need to be available in the staging area. Yes, the dimension and fact tables are available in the staging area only. So I will talk about this dimension fact tables in the next couple of sections. But in ELT, all the data will be available because the extract and load occur in a single action. So because in the dimension of fact tables will be always in the target table, and this type of extract and loading will happen at the target table. There the data transformation takes place. The aggregations. So in the case of ETL, the complexity increase with the additional amount of the data in the data set. So when the aggregations happens, for example, when the aggregations are happening on the existing data, new data is derived. So volume of the data grown. Okay, and it's hard to maintain all the info in two different locations because of the data complexity. So what will happen to ELT in this case? So power of the target platform can process significant amount of the data quickly. Since the target table is hosted on the cloud platform with a flexible performance enhancement, the data aggregation will not take much time in case of ELT. Calculations. So in the case of ETL, it overwrites existing column or need to append the data set and push the target platform. So you can either overwrite existing column or need to do an incremental loading of the data in the tables of data warehouse in order to push the data into target tables, because you cannot skip updating the new data column info in the staging area. So what will happen in ELT? It easily add the calculated column to the existing tables. In the target tables, you can easily add a new column. Since we do not have a staging area, you can easily create a new column on a target tables and populate the new calculated data in that column. Because if you have more and more staging area, so you need to make sure the change takes place at each and every stage of that complete process. What is the next parameter? That is maturity. The process is used, okay? The process is used for over 2 decades, because ETL is been there for the last 2 decades. It is well documented and best practices easily available. So ETL is well matured in terms of process. But in terms of ELT, it's a relatively a new concept and complex to implement. This process is still evolving, and this was started practicing when data lake came into picture. Next parameter is hardware. Most tools have the unique hardware requirements that are expensive. ETL has various tools which you can leverage for your business need. So you have to carefully select those hardware and software based on need because they are quite expensive. So in case of ELT, being a SaaS hardware cost is not an issue. Here, software as a service means, it's a cloud. So the business don't have to spend much on the infrastructure because you can just rent it out. Support for unstructured data. In case of ETL, it mostly supports relational data. But in case of ELT, support for the unstructured data readily available. So these are some of the important differences between ETL and the ELT. So please go through again because these are some of the important differences which you need to know, because for your business, you have to decide on whether I need to go for ETL or I need to go for ELT. So these are the differences which will help you to decide whether I should go for the ETL process or the ELT process. I hope you enjoyed this session. I'll see you in the next chapter. Thank you.